In the early years of World War II, Germany shocked the world with their unique approach to combined arms warfare and tanks. When we look upon the machines which the Wehrmacht used, we usually skip over a hidden gem, which was made by a country which had been occupied and partially annexed before the war even began. In today's video, we uncover this treasure, travel to Czechoslovakia, and present you one of the best light tanks of the early war, the Škoda LT VZ35. The LT VZ35 was designed by Škoda Works in 1935 as a successor to the LT VZ34. It entered service with the Czechoslovak Army in 1936 with 298 tanks produced and assigned to armored regiments. The tank had a three-man crew and was armed with a 37mm Škoda gun and two 7.92mm machine guns. When Germany occupied Bohemia and Moravia in March 1939, they seized 244 LT VZ35 tanks. The Germans designated it the Panzerkampfwagen 35T and used it in the invasions of Poland, France, and the Soviet Union before retiring it in 1942. By the standards of 1941 and 1942, the armor and armament of the tank was no match against the newer type of Soviet tanks, including the T-34 and the KV-1. It must be noticed that its gun showed its weakness earlier, during the fall of France in 1940, with the Panzer 35T not being able to penetrate the hulls of the French B-1 and British Matilda Mark II tanks. In October 1941, commander of the German 6th Panzer Division, Generalleutnant Franz Landgraf, noted the following: "It is indeed deemed necessary to point out that repairs can only be accomplished by cannibalizing other panzers, because there are no longer any spare parts. This means that after retrieval of the panzers that are scattered around the terrain, a maximum of 10 can actually be repaired out of the 41 reported as needing repair. The Panzer 35T can no longer be rebuilt. All of the components are worn out. To be practical, maybe the armored hulls are still usable. The lack of spare parts and the tank becoming obsolete has sealed its fate within the German Heer." The 6th Panzer Division was re-equipped with German tanks in 1942, and all Panzer 35T tanks, which were in working condition, were sold to Romania. Before the war even began, Romania ordered 126 LT VZ35 tanks, designated R2 in Romanian service, from Czechoslovakia in 1936 as part of an army modernization program. The first 15 R2 tanks were received in May 1937, but encountered technical problems with the engine. They were sent back and modified according to Romanian specifications. All 126 tanks were delivered by 1939. Romania used these tanks in combat on the Eastern Front in 1941 to 1942. The R2 tanks were assigned to the 1st Armored Battalion of the 1st Armored Division in. They saw action in several key engagements, like the Battle of Odessa, Kishinev, and Stalingrad. Stalingrad proved to cause the biggest losses for the Romanian tank fleet. The 1st Armored Division suffered heavy losses, with only 19 R2 tanks crossing the Chir River during the retreat. Total R2 tank losses at Stalingrad were 27 destroyed, 30 abandoned due to fuel shortages, and 24 due to mechanical problems. By April 1943, Romania had 59 operational R2 tanks. As the war progressed, they were primarily used for training. Some R2s saw limited combat in 1944 after Romania switched sides following King Michael's coup. In 1944, 30 R2 tanks were modified at Ateliere Leonida with captured Soviet 45mm guns, improving their combat effectiveness, but the tank still remained obsolete. Despite not using the type in combat, the Kingdom of Hungary also had the LT VZ35 in her repertoire. Hungary captured one LT VZ-35 in March 1939 during fighting in Carpatho, Ukraine. Hungary's experience with the LT VZ-35 tank was limited but notable. After capturing the LT VZ-35, the Hungarian military was impressed with its capabilities. It is worth noting that this tank was vastly superior to the Hungarian 38M Toldi, which we have presented in a previous video. They had the tank repaired by Skoda, the original manufacturer. The repaired tank was returned to Hungary in March 1941. Once in Hungarian possession, the LT VZ-35 was primarily used for training purposes. It served in this capacity from 1941 through 1943. This use for training suggests that while the Hungarians found value in the tank, they did not deploy it in significant numbers for combat operations. Based on the available information, there were no notable battles involving Hungarian LT VZ-35 tanks. Hungary's battle experience with this tank was quite limited. After this short summary, we can proudly claim that this little Czechoslovakian gem from the mid-1930s have fought through the biggest conflict known to mankind and made itself a page in the history books.